The United States and China are two great countries with true great economies, but two very different economic systems. It is imperative that we develop trade and economic rules and practices that allow us both to prosper.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and Jeff Berkowitz and I are going to be reviewing some of the major stories that have happened in what is an historic week. And Jeff, as you and I know, we normally focus on issues important to Illinois, but this week is truly historic. There's not many times you get an impeachment and a major trade deal with China. We're going to be taking a look at others, or both of those, I should say, as well as some other issues. But Jeff, why don't we start off with the impeachment? What's your take as we have started the process?
Well, we're taping here on January 17th, 2020. And the big news is it was a month ago that Trump was impeached by the House. Impeached, right? But then Nancy Pelosi had this great idea to hold it back, to not proceed for various reasons. Well, finally, we're moving forward. The trial date is now set for Tuesday, January 21st, okay? The briefing schedule has been set. Everybody know, you go to court, you get major briefs. You get briefs filed by the plaintiffs, the House managers, and then you get a response. That first brief comes out Saturday, tomorrow. If you're watching this right after we tape it on Friday night, Saturday comes, their first brief is due. The response is then from the Trump team is due Monday, the 20th, and then there's a chance for a reply brief from the House managers. So we're off and rolling. The trial actually starts in Chicago, Central Standard Time, 12 p.m., and could go to 5:30 that day. And then after that, it's as long as the trial goes, Monday through Saturday, starts at noon, goes to 5:30. And the big deal is, Terry, is this going to be short or quick? Because that's what Trump wants. He'd like it. Let the plaintiffs, the House managers, present their case. They have seven presenters, 6 of whom are lawyers, but they're all big-time politicians, okay? Led by, of course, Jerry Nadler, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and Adam Schiff maybe is leading it. He's chairman of the Intel Committee. Most of these people are not really distinguished lawyers, okay? Some of them work for maybe a big firm, they're a police chief, whatever, okay? But they're politicians, and they're representative, as Nancy Pelosi would say, they look like Americans. You got 2 African Americans, you got Hispanic, you got women, blah, 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 okay?
All right, so what we have here is we have the beginning of the impeachment process, which a lot of Republicans are saying is a total sham, that after the Russian investigation, then that didn't pan out. Mueller didn't pan out. The Democrats who came in with the word resistance have been looking to get rid of Trump all along, according to the Republicans, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. So then they grabbed onto this phone call with the Ukrainian president that the president made at the end of July and said this is all about the president trying to get the goods on Joe Biden, a possible opponent. Of course, we don't know at this point who will be the opponent for Trump in the general election. But Adam Schiff, who was the head of the intelligence committee in the House, was one of the people that spoke the other day in the Senate as the prosecutors from the House came over to read into the record some of their allegations. Let's listen to a bite from Mr. Schiff.
Donald J. Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in that, using the powers of his high office, President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 United States presidential election. He did so through a scheme or course of conduct that included soliciting the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations that would benefit his reelection.
Well, there you go. That's exhibit 1 on what's wrong with the House managers. I mean, it's almost hard to think of anybody be less telegenic. Almost no eye contact. What the hell was he doing? If that guy's going to speak when they have their television show going on Tuesday and it's going to be Adam Schiff, boy, that's going to be a bad show for them. I mean, contrast that with the new lawyers that Trump has brought on to beef up his team, okay? Jay Sekulow is really, really good at TV. really, really good on radio. He knows how to communicate. He's also a good lawyer. He's also a Messianic Jew. It's a little unusual, okay? Ken Starr's got a lot of experience, and lately he's been picking up his experience on TV, and he's well respected as a former Kirkland & Ellis partner, major law firm. He's also the guy who made his mark from going after Bill Clinton, okay? And when he was impeached and trying that, well, I don't know if he tried that case, and Starr might be the guy to try it. But the other big name, Alan Dershowitz, okay? Everybody knows Alan. He's a big civil liberties guy. And better, who did he support? Hillary Clinton. And who's he defending? Donald Trump. That's a story right there, right, Terry? Well, okay, it is a story. Terry's otherwise occupied. I'll keep it going.
It is. I thought you were going to mention someone that we just is going to be familiar with a lot of people, the former Attorney General of Florida, who is now joining the Trump team.
Do you have her picture handy? So there you go. She is very telegenic. She's smart. She's articulate. And she is Pam Bondi. She's 54. She is the former Attorney General from the state of Florida. She's smart. So she's look, this is a well-rounded team, but these are all folks who can step in and appear on TV. They look good, they sound good.
Well, and they're accomplished lawyers, and the difference is, and that you made to me, I'm going to steal your line, but the point is you have these attorneys for the Trump team who are active attorneys, and they've been practicing law for decades, and the people opposing him, Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, and others, have been in Congress for years. They're not used to being in the give and take of the legalese, I should say. So let me have you go ahead and take that, because I'm stealing your point, I think.
And thanks for reminding me of that. It's a good point, because you're right. Look at Jerry Nadler. I mean, this guy went to Fordham. It's really not that top-notch of a law school, but you know, I don't know how many years in 27 years in the House, 15 years as a legislator. Look, he's a politician. That's his claim to fame. Not really the great lawyer. Hakeem Jeffries, okay. He's African-American, so they're playing on that. They have another African-American in the managers. I mean, went to NYU, fairly good law school. Paul Weiss, good law firm. But what's he known for? He's known for what he's doing now in Congress, not as a lawyer. You go down the list, same thing. These folks are known for politics. They're not known for their presence as a lawyer. Now they say, okay, this looks like America. And people don't like lawyers, Jeff, so there. So
Jeff, but I want to, an accuser of the president, maybe you can give us the background, I want to listen to it, but as someone who is a Ukrainian background, just came out of the woodwork, someone I'd never heard of until recently, who is it, and what can you tell us about him, why we should pay attention?
Lev Parnas. I mean, there's a guy who's Ukrainian. He's got the name for it, okay? He may speak Ukrainian. Look, there's this unusual team that's been involved somewhat in foreign policy, whatever you want to call it, led by Giuliani, okay? Rudy Giuliani, who used to be known as America's mayor, right? He's gone off.
So let's stay with Les Parnas. Who's that? Who is he?
Okay, so this guy is, number one, people don't know that much about him. He hasn't barely been vetted, but he's made a big splash because the plaintiffs like them in this case, the House managers, because he's their witness of the day.
Well,
he seems like
what's he going to? As I understand it, he's going to testify to the fact that the president was going to hold up the aid. That's the allegations made by the Democrats. That's the whole point of their case, that the president was looking for a quid pro quo, that you better investigate the Bidens or we're not going to give you your aid. Now,
yeah,
the Republicans say the aid wasn't, they got the aid. There was no quid pro quo. So this guy, let's listen to some video that comes to us from CNN, and then we can talk about it on the way out.
I don't know those gentlemen. Now, it's possible I have a picture with them because I have a picture with everybody. I don't know them.
The truth is out now, thank God. Yesterday was a big day for us. I thank God every day. I was worried that day is not going to come. I thought they were going to shut me up, make me look like the scapegoat, and try to blame me for stuff that I wasn't done. But with God's help and a great legal team that I have besides me, we were able to get the information out, and now it's out there. So I welcome him to say that even more. Every time he says that, I'll show him another picture.
He's lying.
He's lying.
Of course, the Republicans say this guy is a known liar, and I believe he's being prosecuted at this point for lying.
Right. He's been indicted on 4 counts of election of campaign finance violations, felonies, I believe. Nobody knows too much about him, but people are parading him out. He's very happy and willing to cooperate with the House managers and the plaintiffs, which is unusual for a guy who's being prosecuted. Usually you go and make a deal and say, I'll turn state's evidence. Here's what I'll give you. You give me this. He's not even being prosecuted by the House plaintiffs, and that's who he's cooperating with. In essence, here's his case. You know, the impeachment case is about a deal. And the deal is Trump says, look, if you want your aid, which I'm going to put a hold on, I'd like you, Ukraine, to do one thing for me, to investigate the corruption that was going on by the Bidens. Okay, because a lot of people are concerned about it. You're in Ukraine, and some of that went on there, since there was corruption with Joe Biden's son, the president says, was getting high paid for being on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, something similar in China. That's corrupt. The only reason they wanted him there, he had a contact, which was the Vice President Joe Biden. Okay, so that's in part in the Republicans' mind. Well, that is their case. Okay, but the Democratic spin on that is to say this is terrible because he was trying to get the Ukrainians to interfere with our election, to dig up dirt and so forth. So you see how the spin, depending on what the facts are, whether this is relevant or irrelevant.
It always seems to me, to just make a observation on here, if this was a call in which something like 12 people were listening in, the president knew they were listening in, it was a conference call. It doesn't stand to reason to me that if you're going to be putting the squeeze to somebody for political gain, that you're going to do it on a conference call. I mean, there would be back channels that one could go where you're not going to be recorded. So it just seems to me rather implausible. You know, if you're going to steal something, you're not going to do it when you're on live TV. You're not going to, you know, I mean, that's look, people can believe what they want to believe. It just seems to me that's one of the things that is in the back of the mind, I would think, of some of these senators that are going to be judging this.
But here's the Democrats' argument, Terry. And here's the enough. As relates to Lev and as relates in general. They might say, yes, there's some ambiguity. Well, they would say there's ambiguity. The president says that was a perfect phone call. He has a summary, which he calls a transcript. The transcript, he says, is perfect, okay? The Democrats say, doesn't sound that perfect, sounds like a quid pro quo to them. And then they say, if you have any doubts, well, let us have some witnesses who can shed some light. And they dig up this guy, Lev, because the Democrats like to do this. They're sort of semi-trial lawyers. Find a witness. If that doesn't work, find another witness. So they find Lev, and they think what Lev will say, what he started to say on TV, is that, look, I know the president. I've met with him at least 4 or 5 times, with the president and perhaps others. We were talking, and they say, TV folks say, well, what are you talking about? Well, we were sitting there and talking about how bad our ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, Yovanovitch, or whatever it was. And so Trump was upset, and I told him what she was doing, and she was bad-mouthing him and so forth. He said, well, fire her. So he told whoever else was at the table, according to Lev, that she should be fired. He said this happened 4 or 5 times. And the Democrats would say, well, that story has to be told. This guy should be a witness, because this would clear up for you, Terry. If you doubt that there was any quid pro quo, well, you see, this was part of it. Now, you see, already it's a stretch. How does that relate to your point? Not necessarily. But the Democrats would also say, oh, it's terrible that he wanted to fire the U.S. ambassador. She'd been there for so many years. She was so good. So
I would say that's malarkey, as Joe Biden might say. Because, look, the President of the United States is the head of the foreign policy. He might have the Secretary of State carrying out his policies. The President can fire whoever he wants at any time he wants if they're working for him. And those people in the State Department are part of the executive branch. Our ambassadors are appointed, and they serve at the behest of the President of the United States. So that point doesn't go very far. Relative, let me go on Ukraine, the whole issue of whether or not, there was corruption there and whether we should be sending money. Frankly, a lot of people would say it'd be good to have a little bit of aid being held up when we're sending it to these places. How much of our money in the past, the United States money, when we send it to any number of countries, you know, it ends up getting siphoned off into some Swiss bank account. So, look, the Republicans are in charge of the U.S. Senate. We're going to go through this trial in the Senate. It's not a trial like you have in the court. They're still trying to work it out. And folks, I would say, you know, watch it because this is historic. 46 years ago, we had the process of impeaching Richard Nixon. He resigned before he would have been impeached. But that was, everyone would admit, it started off that whole investigation with an actual crime, the breaking of the Watergate. Then we had Clinton 25 years ago, so this is the third time in 46 years or so. So watch it for historic purposes. But very many people say this is a farce, and more important, that politically this is diminishing the impeachment, which always was considered to be like nuclear war politically. And now to be bringing this up, this is minimizing it, and I'm afraid that going forward, you know, this could be used for political purposes.
You took us back to the basics. The Constitution says you can impeach the president for what? For treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. It certainly wasn't treason. The Democrats thought they could argue bribery about a month or two ago, and they couldn't make that case. So they're left with, are there any high crimes and misdemeanors? And they might say they now hit on it because the president was impounding this money that Congress had authorized to be spent and given as aid to Ukraine. So in their view, and the GAO has just issued a report, the General Accounting Office of Congress, and has said this was illegal. So there's the rub, Terry. Was it illegal? If not, there's no crime. If so, does that even make it impeachable? Does that make it a high crime and misdemeanor? Okay, that's why we have a trial, they would say, the Democrats, and the Republicans should say, well, let's get to the point, because when you present the case, you might see you don't have any ambiguity here. You don't really need, you can decide this, vote up or down. You don't need to have witnesses. And the rules say the Senate is driven by the majority.
All right, so let's look. The other thing is this is going to be clouding the entire political landscape for the whole year. Coming up in November, we are going to have some important elections at the congressional level. A number of the seats in Illinois are going to be determining, among other places, of course, who's going to control the House of Representatives. And whether Nancy Pelosi and her Democrats will be thrown out, the Republicans might come back in. So we got the 14th in Illinois, the 6th in Illinois, and the 13th. There are some key races. We got Mr. Lipinski, of course, the Illinois primary is coming up on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. Mr. Lipinski, who is considered a conservative Democrat of sorts here in Illinois, facing a primary opponent. These are things that are all going to be impacted by what happens next week on this Trump impeachment effort, and how much the people on the in the districts are going to be galvanized, either against Trump and for the Democrats, or in favor if you're Republicans. Jerry, it's going to be an interesting election season.
But we don't have to speculate, or not much, because we know the rules of the Constitution. You're going to need 2/3 of the Senate, 67 senators, to vote to remove the president who's been impeached. You have 47 Democrats. If they all hang tough, that's 47. You need 20 Republicans. I think everybody agrees, unless everybody's shocked and there's some evidence that we don't know of now, okay, and we probably would. The Democrats are not going to get 20 Republicans to join them, so therefore Trump will not be impeached. And therefore, your point would be, politically, what does that do to the congressional races? What does that do to the presidential race that the Democrats have been going after for 3 years? Donald Trump, they finally impeached him, and they don't come close to removing him. Can the president argue, well, look what's going on now? You know, look at the trade deals.
You know, the trade deal, and here's the other thing.
Look how I'm doing
this is where I want to go. This is the point. Yeah. The same week where we had this process of impeachment starting, you had the President of the United States doing phase one of a trade deal with China. China is the second largest economy in the world after the United States. Hundreds of billions of dollars are at stake, and the President had a major victory by inking a deal with China. Let's take a listen, and then we'll come back and talk about that.
On manufacturing, they'll be spending $75 billion. They'll be putting into our country, okay? They're going to be putting into our country $75 billion on manufacturing. $50 billion worth of energy. So that's great for our energy people. So we have $50 billion for energy, $50 billion for agriculture, and $40 to $50 billion on services, including, Rob, financial services. So the banks are going to be doing great, credit cards, all of the things that you do so well. One of the other things I have to say is the protection of intellectual property. We have very strong protection of intellectual property.
So that's phase one. They're going to be going on to phase two. But Jeff, these are some important issues. The Chinese have been ripping off American manufacturers, American artists, or CDs or movies. Music have long been sold there without copyright protection. I know a person here in Illinois who wrote a book and the Chinese reprinted it word for word and said, no, you don't understand. We only steal the books that we think are worthwhile. So the fact of the matter is now the president is putting into that deal that has been signed some protection on intellectual properties. It means that people like Boeing here in Illinois, when they sell planes, will not have to surrender their designs and all their other intellectual property just for the right to do business. And the other thing, going back to the impeachment, let's bring this together. This is a president who has been racking up major accomplishments. This is one of them. The other one also passed through Congress this week, the USMCA deal, the deal with Canada and Mexico. And even on the day that Trump was impeached in the House and they signing the agreements to the Articles of Impeachment, the stock market was up. And what that is telling us is nobody is really out there taking this all that seriously. If Wall Street thought, if the business community thought that this president was going to be removed from office, the stock market would have been down over 1,000 points. Instead, it was up. So I think the threat is for the Democrats that after they go through this process, they could be viewed very negatively and come back to bite them, as the Republicans lost control of the House after they impeached President Clinton back in 1998 or 99, I think it was.
It's certainly looking that way now. Even if you, I mean, if you take an objective look, the only way this thing goes south for the president is that this trial gets dragged on, new witnesses keep appearing, the Democrats somehow persuade 4 Republicans to join them in voting to have a number of witnesses, maybe, and maybe they don't get, the Republicans might go along with that if they got the Bidens, father and son, to join, if they were to give a few witnesses to the Democrats. But if it goes the way you're projecting here, that it's reasonably short and the economy continues to do very well, this could be a major disaster for the Democrats. And the thing of it is, I mean, we're talking the MCA deal, which passed the Senate, and that's a good example that nobody's talked too much about. But that was it passed the House quite a while ago, but it passed the Senate 89 for, 10 against. That is one of the strongest recent pieces of bipartisan legislation that we've had. And people, I think, if you look at the passing of the MCA and you look at the China deal, phase 1, which has something like $200 billion, manufacturing, agricultural, and other products by agreement, the Chinese agreeing to buy from the US, and the intellectual property, greater enforcement of intellectual property rights, the intellectual property of the US. If all of that happens, even though, and the Democrats say, well, it may not because there's not a good enforcement mechanism. But the president says, well, that's why I left a lot of the tariffs still there. So if they want to get those the remaining tariffs removed, he's removed some, and he agreed to postpone some. We've got to get an agreement on phase 2, which is much more, significant. which we won't go into.
Well, it
now,
is significant, but phase one was more significant than a lot of people thought. And the other thing, even though the president just inked phase one with the Chinese, the president is continuing to have tariffs. And this is another thing. There are teeth in this agreement. This is a very smart deal. It's being recognized by a smart deal. The president put the screws to the Chinese by putting high tariffs on their products. And a lot of people thought the president would pay a price politically. You got to say this about President Trump. He is willing to stand by his convictions. He's willing to take the political heat, because I don't know if any other president would have been doing this. And one of the commentators that came out and said, you know what, this worked out pretty well for the president, was Jim Cramer, famously of CNBC, one of the most successful investors in the history of Wall Street. Let's listen to what he said about the president's using tariffs as a tool in this negotiation with the Chinese.
Tariffs worked. If you go back in time, people just said, listen, tariffs won't work, won't change them. The Chinese are all powerful. Tariffs will hurt our consumer. The consumer is going to see a lot of inflation, both at the producer level and the consumer level, ultimately, which is going to hurt the U.S. economy. None of that happened. The whole narrative is that China caved, and China's going to continue to cave because we didn't take the tariffs off. So I keep wondering when people are going to recognize that it is historic that tariffs did succeed. They weren't supposed to work. The Chinese were supposed to be able to get around them. It didn't happen. The Chinese were kind of accepting that they had to do something in order to keep the American market.
And so, Jeff, I would argue that a lot of people say this was a big deal for the president, a very successful deal, and he came out looking well. And so at the very time, which it should be the nadir of his presidency, being impeached and then having go to the Senate, the president is standing pretty strong.
Well, let's go where this leaves us. If it goes as we've predicted, the president is clearly not removed. The Democrats don't come very close. The trial is not that long. Not few, if any, witnesses that the Democrats are allowed. It's all a bust. So where does that leave us in terms of the presidential election? Well, who is the Democratic candidate going to be? As of now, as we look at it, there's 6 candidates who are on the stage, 12 left in the race, 6 on the last debate that they had on the stage. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Okay, I don't think Pete Buttigieg, who was on the stage, is going to do it. I don't think Senator Klobuchar is going to do it. I don't think Tom Steyer is going to do it, even though he's spending $70 million. Maybe Mike Bloomberg, who I guess has spent $130 million, and we're talking multi-hundred millions more if he thinks this is going well. Maybe Bloomberg could do it with that kind of money, and maybe he can get the nomination.
I would say
maybe goes to
this could be one of the more interesting. We often hear, oh boy, remember the old days when the conventions weren't just dog and pony shows and you really didn't know who was going to be the nominee. This could be, at the Democratic convention, one where some dark horse comes out of the woodwork and gets the nomination. Because these candidates who have been running, a lot of them there's been a lot of articles about how this is a weak field, and I would say, as a political junkie my whole life, I think this is the weakest Democratic field that I've ever seen.
So maybe you're right. Maybe it's brokered convention. Maybe they turn to Bloomberg. Maybe they turn to Tim Kaine. Maybe they turn to Deval Patrick. These are people on the wings. Maybe the country says, the hell with it, we're sticking with Donald Trump.
And you look, right now,
that's why we have an election to find out.
It's anyone's guess. We're about to have the Iowa caucus, goes right into New Hampshire primary the following week. At this point, it looks like Bernie Sanders is in the lead, but I don't think any of the Democrat supporters on Wall Street, from what we hear, want anything to do with Bernie Sanders.
So, and yeah, if it's Biden, if it's Sanders and Warren going against Donald Trump, what do you say? Who does the country pick?
I have no idea. But Jeff, it is time to say goodbye. I can't say that.
Well, we'll make that prediction next week, okay?